October 1986. In the silent dark of the North Atlantic, a Soviet submarine carrying enough nuclear firepower to erase 16 American cities begins a routine patrol, until a single ruptured missile tube triggers a chain reaction of explosions, radiation, and impossible orders. The crew faces not just their own deaths, but the risk of igniting World War III. What actually happened inside K-219, and how close did the world come to ending? K-219 cut through the waters of the North Atlantic beneath a sky-thick autumn storms. In October 1986, this submarine was not on a combat mission or a hunt for enemy vessels. Its orders were simple: remain hidden, maintain radio silence, and wait. This was the doctrine of nuclear deterrence. An unbroken chain of patrols day and night, year after year, to guarantee that any attack on the Soviet Union would trigger an immediate and devastating response. The crew was accustomed to the rhythm of these patrols. Watches rotated, drills repeated, maintenance checks performed by rote. The submarine was a closed world, sealed off from the surface. Its presence was known only to a handful of officers in Moscow. Every system was double-checked, every compartment locked down. The cost of error was understood by all, but routine dulled the edge of fear. K-219 carried 2 nuclear reactors and a full complement of ballistic missiles, each one assigned a target thousands of miles away. The submarine's precise location, roughly 700 miles northeast of Bermuda, was a classified secret. Only a handful of coordinates on a classified map marked its patrol zone. For the men aboard, the ocean was both shield and prison. Radio transmissions were rare, and news from home arrived weeks late or not at all. The only constant was the hum of machinery and the pressure of water pressing in on every side. Soviet command demanded that their missile boats remain invisible, undetected by American sonar nets and hunter-killer submarines. The crew's job was not to fight, but to wait for an order that, if given, would mean the end of the world. On paper, this patrol was no different from dozens before it. The submarine's systems had been inspected, the crew drilled in emergency procedures, and the route plotted with care. But beneath the surface, age and stress had begun to wear at the hardware. Seals, valves, and welds, each one a potential point of failure, were hidden from view, waiting for the wrong combination of pressure and time. No one aboard K-219 could have known that a routine patrol was about to become a race against disaster. 16 missile tubes ran the length of K-219's spine, each one loaded with an R-27 ballistic missile. These were not relics or dummies, they were live, liquid-fueled weapons designed for one purpose: to deliver a nuclear strike across continents. Each R-27 missile carried a warhead that could erase a city in a single flash. With a range of up to 2,400 kilometers, every missile on board could reach deep into the heart of North America from the North Atlantic. The submarine's arsenal represented over 100 times the explosive power of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. The R-27 was a product of Cold War engineering, compact enough to fit in a submarine, yet powerful enough to carry a megaton-class warhead. It used hypergolic propellants, unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine as fuel, and nitrogen tetroxide as oxidizer. These chemicals ignited instantly on contact, making the missile quick to launch, but also making its storage and handling dangerously volatile. The entire system was built for speed and surprise. In theory, K-219 could surface, open its missile hatches, and launch its full complement of 16 missiles in less than 5 minutes. Every tube, every seal, every weld was critical. A single failure could turn a missile from a weapon of deterrence into a threat to the crew itself. The submarine's firepower was both shield and sword, meant to guarantee survival, but with the potential to destroy everything if anything went wrong inside the hull. In the silence of the patrol, the crew lived with the knowledge that they were surrounded not just by ocean, but by the raw materials of nuclear war, packed into 16 steel cylinders, waiting for an order that everyone hoped would never come. Shortly after dawn on October 3, 1986, a routine check in the missile compartment revealed an anomaly. The pressure gauge on missile tube number 6 had begun to drop. Beneath layers of steel and insulation, a submerged seal had given way. This failure was not the result of a collision or enemy action. The seal, made from a specialized rubber compound designed to withstand the crushing force of the Atlantic, had aged beyond its limits. Years of pressure, temperature swings, and chemical exposure had left it brittle. Maintenance logs from earlier patrols showed no urgent warnings, only the quiet accumulation of fatigue that can hide in the machinery of a submarine. Seawater, driven by the relentless pressure outside the hull, began to seep through the compromised seal. At first, the leak was slow, measured in drops, not streams. But at 40 meters depth, even a small breach can become catastrophic in minutes. Water found its way past the hatch cover, filling the narrow space between the missile tube and the outer hull. The crew in the missile compartment acted quickly, reporting the drop in pressure and attempting to activate pumps to clear the intrusion. But the design of the missile tube left little margin. Once water entered, it bypassed barriers meant only for short-term defense. The R-27 missile in Tube 6 was not protected from the elements by accident. Every seal, every weld, every layer of insulation was a calculated defense against the ocean. But the system depended on each part working perfectly. With the seal compromised, seawater crept closer to the missile's internal tanks. There was no time for elaborate diagnostics or remote repair. The compartment was hermetically sealed as a precaution, locking in both the crew and the problem. No one yet knew how far the water had traveled or what it might touch next. The crew's training told them to expect fire, electrical short, or mechanical jam. Few had considered that a simple failure in a rubber gasket, no larger than a dinner plate, could threaten the entire submarine. There was no warning siren, no dramatic alarm, just a slow, silent leak, hidden behind layers of steel, setting off a chain reaction that no one could reverse. The first breach had come and gone, and the escalation had already begun. Missile Tube 6 was now a sealed chamber of lethal chemistry. The seawater that slipped past the failed gasket did not simply flood the compartment, it set off a chain reaction that no training manual could fully prepare for. Inside the missile, unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide waited in separate tanks, ready to ignite at a moment's notice. These were hypergolic propellants, chemicals so reactive they combust the instant they meet, requiring no spark, no flame, only contact. But seawater, with its dissolved salts and minerals, was enough to trigger violent hydrolysis. The moment water reached the oxidizer, it began to split molecules, releasing fumes of nitric acid and clouds of nitrogen dioxide. The compartment filled with brown gas, corrosive, toxic, and heavier than air. The reaction's heat built rapidly, raising internal pressure and attacking the missile's internal seals. Within minutes, the temperature inside the tube soared. Alexander Petrachkov, the weapons officer, made the call to disengage the hatch cover and attempt to vent the tube. The operation was desperate, an effort to relieve pressure before the missile's structure gave way. He worked the manual controls as the compartment filled with choking fumes. Every second, the risk of catastrophic combustion grew. As Petrachkov struggled with the mechanism, the chemical reaction reached critical mass. The hypergolic fuel and oxidizer, now mixed by the boiling, corrosive seawater, ignited. The blast was immediate and brutal. The missile was torn from its restraints, ejected through the shattered tube, and hurled into the sea. The explosion tore a hole in the hull, sending a shock wave through the compartment and flooding it with more seawater. 2 sailors died instantly in the blast. A third succumbed soon after to the toxic gases that now filled the air. The force of the explosion ruptured bulkheads and scattered fragments of missile casing throughout the bay. Nitrogen dioxide and chlorine gas spread through the ventilation ducts, overwhelming the submarine's filtration systems. In the chaos, communications between compartments degraded, gauges spiked, alarms sounded, and the crew scrambled to seal off the affected sections. The submarine began to lose buoyancy, sinking from its patrol depth toward the abyss. In less than 10 minutes, a minor leak had escalated into a full-scale nuclear emergency. The missile compartment was now an uninhabitable void, filled with acid vapor, smoke, and the residue of a weapon designed to end cities. The rest of the crew could only guess at the true extent of the damage as the K-19 systems buckled under the strain. Soviet naval doctrine left no room for improvisation in a reactor emergency. The rules were absolute. If automated systems failed, the only way to prevent a meltdown was to send a man into the reactor compartment and lower the control rods by hand. This was not a suggestion or a last resort. It was written into the manuals and drilled into every crew member responsible for the reactors. The expectation was clear. The safety of the ship, and possibly the world beyond it, depended on obeying that order, no matter the cost. On K-219, the explosion in the missile compartment had crippled electrical systems and left the reactor automatic shutdown unresponsive. The compartment itself was growing hotter by the minute. Toxic gases from the blast lingered in the air. The fire had already warped metal and drained oxygen. Sensors gave only partial readings. No one could be certain how long the remaining systems would hold, or how quickly the situation might spiral out of control. The order from command was simple in its wording and impossible in its demand. Someone had to enter the reactor space and insert the rods manually. There was no guarantee of survival. The protocols did not address heroism or sacrifice. They only specified the steps: open the compartment, locate the manual controls, and force the rods into place. If the rods did not go in, the reactor core would overheat, and the submarine would become a floating nuclear hazard. If the rods did go in, the man inside might not make it out. The doctrine was written for machines and systems, but in this moment, it asked for something only a person could give. Sergei Preminin was 20 years old, a reactor operator trained for emergencies no manual could truly describe. When the order came to shut down the reactor by hand, he understood what it meant. The compartment beyond the sealed hatch was thick with heat and smoke. Electrical systems had failed. The automatic shutdown had not triggered. The only way to prevent a meltdown was to lower the control rods manually. That required entering an environment already hostile to life. Preminin and his superior Nikolai Belikov forced open the hatch. They faced a wall of superheated air and the stinging bite of toxic gases. Inside, they worked together to lower the first 3 rods on one reactor. Their protective masks grew hot and heavy. Oxygen thinned. Belikov collapsed and had to be pulled out. Preminin remained inside, alone, his hands slick with sweat, muscles shaking from the effort. The rods, warped by heat, resisted every push. He forced the last rod into place, then turned to the second reactor. Each movement grew slower as the air thickened and the temperature rose. He managed to lower all 4 rods, one after another, until both reactors were finally shut down. When he tried to leave, the hatch would not budge. The fire inside had raised the pressure, pinning the door shut from the inside. Preminin called for help, but the crew outside could not break the seal. Oxygen ran out. His breathing slowed. Sergei Preminin died in the dark, having prevented a nuclear catastrophe with his own hands. His body remained behind the sealed hatch, the last barrier between disaster and survival. American sonar stations along the Atlantic picked up the faint, irregular echoes of K-219's distress. Submarines patrolling nearby logged unusual acoustic signatures and erratic Soviet radio traffic. The signals were ambiguous. No one on the US side could say for certain if this was an accident or the opening move of something far worse. Meanwhile, Captain Igor Britanov faced a decision that doctrine did not cover. The submarine's hull was breached, compartments were filled with toxic gas, and the reactor was silent but not safe. The tow line from the Soviet freighter Krasnogvardeysk strained against the weight of the wounded vessel. Orders from Moscow insisted on salvage, but the situation aboard was deteriorating by the hour. Britanov ordered the crew to abandon ship, an act that ran counter to every tradition and every expectation from command. He remained aboard until the last man had crossed to the rescue vessel. With the submarine unmanned, water poured in unchecked. The tow cable snapped under the strain. K-219 slipped below the surface, vanishing into the abyss with its nuclear warhead still sealed inside. At a depth of over 18,000 feet, the submarine came to rest, out of reach, out of sight, but not out of mind. The world would never know how close it had come. Official records from October 1986 show that Soviet authorities responded to the loss of K-219 with silence and tightly controlled statements. General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev convened a closed meeting 3 days after the explosion. In that session, he questioned whether the crew had abandoned ship out of panic, and he instructed officials to tell foreign governments that a nuclear explosion had been ruled out. Any mention of radioactive contamination at depth was kept vague. The Politburo's internal directives made it clear: minimize the incident, avoid technical details, and shift attention away from the scale of the disaster. Recognition for individual sacrifice was slow and incomplete. Sergei Preminin's actions were not made public for years. His posthumous title of Hero of the Russian Federation was awarded only after the collapse of the Soviet Union, a delayed acknowledgement that left his family and shipmates in the dark for more than a decade. Other crew members faced investigations, and some were accused of negligence or worse. The official narrative remained tightly managed, with press releases portraying the event as a routine accident and downplaying the risk to the world. Every claim in this account is verified by at least 2 independent sources. Technical and historical details were reviewed by Cold War naval experts and by Russian historians. Discrepancies or uncertainties are clearly flagged, and the documentary's full source list is available for review. The story of K-219 is told with the same rigor the official record lacked: transparent, accountable, and signed off by experts on both sides of the Cold War. Nuclear weapons still sleep beneath the ocean, and automated systems remain vulnerable to failure and misunderstanding. Today, the world relies on protocols and technology, but history proves that human choices, not machinery, decide our fate. As tensions echo in new forms, the margin between peace and disaster remains razor thin. The next near miss may not leave time for unsung heroes. Share your thoughts below.